This video was made possible by HelloFresh. Go to HelloFresh.com and use code WENDOVER14 to get 14 free meals plus free shipping. Air travel is back, with an asterisk. In 2019, 79,332,046 people passed through TSA checkpoints in the month of July. In 2021, 63,118,017 did, representing an 80% demand recovery. This blows away most expert forecasts from 2020 and is a remarkable number considering international travel, and certainly international tourism, is still nearly non-existent. In Europe, air travel has recovered to around 70% of 2019 levels. In China, the number of scheduled seats has already surpassed 2019 numbers. They're beyond 100% recovery. So, the US, Europe, and China, the world's three largest aviation markets, have experienced recoveries beyond the most bullish expectations. But now, the asterisk. In the second financial quarter of 2019, United Airlines earned $11,402 million in operating revenue. In the same quarter of 2021, however, just $5,471 million, about 48% of the 2019 number. Meanwhile, American and Delta's second quarter 2021 revenues were 62.5% and 56.8% respectively compared to 2019. Context does not make these numbers better because in the second quarter of 2021, about 67% as many travelers passed through TSA checkpoints as 2019. Simply put, revenue recovery is lagging behind demand recovery. A culprit is easily identifiable. In the second quarter of 2019, United earned 14.32 cents per seat per mile flown, available seat mile as it's called in the industry. In 2021, they're earning just 11.02 cents per ASM, 76.95% of that of 2019. Meanwhile, American's revenue per ASM is about 78.84% of 2019, while Delta's is 69.45%. While overall revenue should be considered entirely within the context of overall demand, revenue per ASM should not be. Airlines decide how many seat miles to make available. They decide how many flights to fly. So the fact that airlines are earning some 20 to 30% less per seat stamps a massive asterisk on the triumphant calls of travel's return. Travelers may be back, but they're not the same. In the US's summer 2021, the entire country seemingly went on vacation. Hiltons in Hawaii were going for Four Seasons prices, rental cars in Alaska were a luxury afforded to only the most foresighted travelers, and Ubers in Vegas were as elusive as a royal flush. The US's tourism infrastructure was at absolute peak capacity in summer 2021, but then there's this. Midtown Manhattan, DC's K Street, Chicago's Loop, America's major business districts still sit abandoned. Despite the resurgence in life in the US, many of the country's largest office-based employers, including Google, Microsoft, Apple, Facebook, Deloitte, Cisco, and McKinsey, have yet to return to the office in any meaningful way. When companies of this nature travel, they're doing so to visit other companies, so without open offices, there are no companies to visit. Therefore, the fact that these companies, which include the top corporate travel spenders in the country, have yet to return to the office explains why business travel has yet to return meaningfully. For United, American, Delta, British Airways, Air France, Cathay Pacific, Singapore Airlines, Qantas, all the old, storied international airlines that you've heard of, this represents a disproportionately dramatic problem. These airlines, full-service network carriers as they're called, are essentially designed to cater to the needs of business travelers. Take, for example, the difference between Southwest, a leisure-focused airline, and United, a business-focused airline. If, for example, someone from Phoenix was traveling to Bozeman, Montana to visit Yellowstone National Park, they could choose to fly on Southwest. During the summer season, this airline operates a non-stop flight on the route each Saturday and Sunday morning. The same traveler could also choose to fly on United Airlines through either Denver or Los Angeles, leaving at 6:10, 9:40, 11:48, 1:55, or 3:41 p.m. each day. Leisure travelers, however, disproportionately value the convenience of a non-stop flight, and they wouldn't mind organizing their trip around the 2 days per week when a flight operates. Business travelers, however, are different. Let's say a sales rep from Phoenix needed to travel to a client meeting in Memphis taking place from 2 to 6 p.m. on a Tuesday. Southwest does have a nonstop flight between the cities, but in order to make that meeting, the traveler would have to take the Monday flight, leaving at 12:25 p.m., arriving at 5:20 p.m. They then have to sit around in Memphis for 21 hours until the meeting, then wait another 23 hours after for the 4 p.m. Wednesday flight back. On United, however, the same traveler could leave at 6 a.m. on Tuesday, connect through Denver, arrive at 1 p.m., make the 2 p.m. meeting, then take a 7 a.m. flight back through Houston the following morning and arrive at the office by noon, ready for the rest of the day's work. Faced with the prospect of waiting around in Memphis for almost a day more, they'll almost always pick United. In all, business travelers value not only the day of travel, but the time of day of travel. Therefore, it's all a compromise. Do you want flights going exactly where you want them to, or flights leaving exactly when you want them to? Disproportionately, leisure travelers value the former, business travelers the latter. This is why nearly every United, Delta, and American flight routes through one of their hubs. By consolidating travelers onto more regular flights to fewer destinations, they can offer far more choices of flight itineraries. The optimization for business travel extends beyond this to full-service network carriers' focus on premium cabins, frequent flyer programs, airport services, and more, but fundamentally, there are stark differences between airlines made for leisure travelers and those for business travelers, and many of the world's largest airlines fall into that second category. Historically, however, it's been worth it. Business travelers are on the road year-round, rather than when the weather is good or school is out, meaning they represent a more reliable client base for airlines. In addition, they're more price inelastic. That's to say, when a consultant needs to travel, they truly need to travel and will book a ticket regardless of the price. While leisure travelers will make decisions on price, businesses will pay whatever it takes to get their staff wherever they need to go to make the money. Only about 20% of domestic trips are taken by those on business, but they account for far more than 20% of revenue. That's because of what's referred to as price discrimination. It works off of a simple truth. Leisure travelers overwhelmingly make their plans and book trips months in advance, while business travelers book weeks or days in advance. Based on their own financial disclosures, we know that the average United flight length is currently 1,460 miles or 2,350 kilometers, and that their average cost to operate a flight of that length per passenger is $199.58. We also know that, 2 months before, United is selling tickets for 8 of these 12 roughly 1,460-mile flights for below what it costs to operate on a per-passenger basis. In fact, the overall average fare for these 12 flights sits below their operating cost 2 months before departure. While the sale of ancillaries such as extra legroom seats, checked luggage, Wi-Fi, food and beverage, and more would likely push them above break-even, it's clear that United would not turn a significant profit on the prices most of us pay for tickets. But that's by design. To fill planes, they need to sell cheap tickets, at least at first. In the weeks leading up to a flight, however, fares rise dramatically, so by the day before departure, the average fare for those 12 flights more than doubles to $413.83. These are the fares businesses are paying for their typically last-minute travel. Now, on that average 1,460-mile flight, imagine for the sake of simplicity that it was operated by an all-economy 179-seat 737-900. We know based on United's company-wide load factor that 150 of its seats should be filled. In this case, their operating cost would total $29,937. Their total revenue from that flight, however, would be $36,245. That means the operating profit margin is $6,308. Imagining again for the sake of simplicity that United sold this hypothetical perfectly average flight for either that $199.58 price point or $413.83 price point, that would mean to attain their average $36,245 in revenue, they would need to sell 120 of the cheaper tickets, largely to just leisure travelers, and a mere 30 at the higher price point. That's just 20% of the overall tickets sold on this flight, but 20% happens to represent another important statistic: the average proportion of domestic air travel in the US completed by business travelers. It's not surprising that these numbers work together so perfectly, because this is the exact equation United and other business-oriented airlines have been using for decades. In the case of this hypothetical flight, it's the final 15 passengers, half of the business travelers, that make up the entirety of the airline's profit. Now, however, in the COVID era, they're gone. Southwest Airlines averaged 10.22 cents in operating cost per available seat mile in 2021's second quarter, while United averaged 14.49 cents. A dramatic difference simply explained by the fact that Southwest is a low-cost airline, meaning its operating costs are low, and United is not. In a business environment now devoid of the majority of price-inelastic business travelers, airlines like United have and will have a lot harder time keeping up with the recovery. While United, Delta, and American's revenue recovery all fell behind demand recovery in the second quarter, Southwest's was on track. 67% overall recovery was, in their case, accompanied by 67.83% revenue recovery. And now, as August turns into September, recovery is only going to get tougher. Summer 2021 was one of the busiest on record for many American and European tourist destinations, but that's coming to an end. In a normal year, after a summer lull counterbalanced by the busiest leisure travel season, business travel starts picking up come early September and stays above average through the end of the year. This helps stabilize demand during a season when few travel for leisure purposes, but this year, that's not going to be there in its full extent. This abnormally one-sided transition is already happening. Travel demand in the US dropped 2.8% between the week of July 25th and August 1st, then another 3% the week of August 8th. It's a small drop, but there are some initial indications that it's happening faster in 2019, when the first 18 days of August saw 4.2% fewer travelers than the last 18 days of July. This year, the difference between those two sets of days is 5.5%. In absolute terms, that might not seem like a dramatic difference, but in relative terms, it means the demand drop is happening 30% faster, and these weeks represent only the very first of leisure travel's end of summer retreat. This trend will likely continue, and more importantly, accelerate as leisure travel continues to drop and business travel fails to rise. In the US, the next strong leisure travel period doesn't come until Thanksgiving in November, and in Europe, it's Christmas. And of course, the Delta variant spread surely will not help, as businesses will play it safe with office openings and corporate travel, now realizing that the path out of the pandemic is not linear in nature. For airlines, there's not a whole lot that can be done at this point. What the world lacks right now is confidence. In the US, the University of Michigan's Consumer Sentiment Index, tracking confidence in the overall state in the economy, recorded one of its largest drops in history between July and August 2021. It reached a level of 70.2, which is lower than any point in the pandemic so far and its lowest level since the Great Recession. This is reflective of the amount of uncertainty the Delta variant and its rise in a post-vaccine era has caused, despite the fact that in the US, Europe, the UK, and other places where vaccines are now widely available, hospitalizations and deaths are still far from where they were when consumer sentiment was higher. Without the certainty of whether the pandemic will worsen or improve in the coming months, however, businesses will not make the big decisions that will bring business travel back. Summer will have likely marked the first profitable period of the pandemic for European and American airlines, but it seems increasingly unlikely that the recovery will continue its upward trend in fall without strong business travel. There's also the question of whether business travel will ever fully recover. Most experts believe doomsday predictions of Zoom killing business travel to be overblown. However, there is a realistic possibility that 2019 could serve as the historical high watermark for corporate travel as the world of big business moves increasingly digital and concerns about the environmental impacts of flying to lunch in another city mount. If this proves true, subtle changes will occur in the coming years that make United and Lufthansa look more like Southwest and EasyJet. COVID should have taught airlines just how important flexibility and adaptability is. It's hard to fault airlines for failing to turn a profit during the depths of a crisis, but now, as much of the developed world plots a slow, bumpy path out of the pandemic, there is opportunity for profitability. Therefore, this is when the test truly begins. This is what airlines were waiting for. So now, with cash reserves waned and investor goodwill gone, the coming months are truly make or break for airlines. Last year, around when COVID was starting, I decided to basically stop ordering takeout. I was the kind of person that was so busy that I ordered food almost every single day, but I eventually realized just how expensive and unhealthy this was. I was still tight on time though, so I wanted a relatively easy way to make dinner at the end of the day that wasn't frozen pizza or ramen, so I found HelloFresh. I've now used them for about a year and a half, and actually asked them to sponsor the channel since I was such a fan. This is all completely true, and I even have the hundreds of recipe cards to prove it, but if you don't know what they are, HelloFresh sends you a box each week with all the fresh ingredients you need to make the meals you selected the previous week, and it all comes in the exact right quantities, which cuts down both on prep and shopping time quite a lot. That way you go straight to cooking, like I did with these tropical teriyaki pork bowls, which are one of my favorite meals of theirs. It also turns out that HelloFresh is a more sustainable meals option, as research has found their carbon footprint is 25% lower than meals from grocery store ingredients, partially since it cuts down on food waste by sending the exact quantities you need. Also, getting all these options means I tend to try types of food that I wouldn't normally. It's a great way to increase variety at dinner time. Best of all, you can go to HelloFresh.com and use code WENDOVER14 to get 14 free meals plus free shipping. You'll see why I like them so much and help support Wendover simultaneously, so head there or click the button on screen now.